All right. Well, it is 10 o'clock, so we'll go ahead and get started, and some others may come in. Um, I'll tell you, it's probably what I'm seeing is what I expected, the usual cast of characters. Um, I could have probably, of the 7 of you that are here right now, I could have probably guessed 6 of you that would be here. So um, it's a typical meeting that way. I do know that for my afternoon and the Tuesday Thursday class that there are 2 people that are in the CS2 class, and they're having a mandatory meeting on Zoom at this time. I don't want to make things mandatory because I know people's schedules are off and things. Um, let's start with, is there anything in particular you guys want me to cover? Well, based on the silence, I guess not. We're working right now on if statements, and for a couple of you maybe did not catch the little banter that Todd and I had going on before. Next week, I'm probably going to do at least 2 of these during the day and 1 on Monday night. Some of it will be repeat, especially the Monday night, because my night students, it's hard for them to get here during the day. So I want this to be more question and answer. We're working on if statements, so let's just review a little bit. And remember that the if statements, there are 6 possibilities on your if statements. You've got the greater than, or well, let's start with the equal. You've got equal, and remember that's a double equal. You've got greater than, less than, greater than or equal to, and less than or equal to. And the syntax is if, and I'll just use numbers 3 or 4. I hit 4 instead of 3. Double equal 4 in this case. So that would be true because 4 is equal 4. Remember, you use the double equal for equality. I'll just print 4. And that would be true in this case. And it printed 4. If I make this one 5 and run it, it would be false. So it just skips out of whatever's in the true. Now we also have can add the else and say, well, if it's not true, do something else. And let me change that top one to true. Okay. Any questions on that? Does everybody remember that or have that? All right. Then we added, or the next thing is, instead of just an else, we had the elifs or else if. And let me create a couple of variables. X equal 5, y equal 4. And let's change this. If x equal y, we'll print again true. This isn't really going to change anything yet because it's not true. But instead of the else, we can have an else if or elif. Say elif x greater than y. And let me change this top one to x equal y. And I can have multiple LFs. I can say also then another LF, x less than y. And if I run it now, x is greater than y, because x is 5, y is 4. So this first if will be false, but this else if will be true, so it should print the x greater than y. And it does. And I had a capital X there, probably make it lowercase. If I change it and make them equal again, that if should be what runs or is true. And so the x equal y. And if I make the y bigger, I've got a capital X there. So notice that it didn't show the error until it actually tried to evaluate that else if. That probably should help show you that this wasn't even looked at when one of these first two are true. And so now it did the x less than. So only one of those will be true. And once it finds out which is true, it never looks at the others. Now, in this case, we've tried all the possibilities, equal, greater than, and less than. If we haven't tried all the possibilities, you can go in and put a final else, which is a catch-all, and do something. In this particular case, that will never be executed because there's no way that the others can ever be, well, that one of those three and above won't be true. Okay. Any questions there?
No.
Okay. Now, I've not done this, but I'm going to add some breakpoints and show you how to do a little debugging so we can watch this. And if I click to the right of the line number in PyCharm, I get a little red dot. Click again, it goes away. But that little red dot's what is called a breakpoint, and I can put as many of those as I want. And if I set a breakpoint, if I run it in debug mode, it will pause just before, not after, but just before it executes the line. I'm going to come down and put my famous after the if line. So you'll see what happens afterwards. And I'll actually, let me put a breakpoint where it'll pause just before it. Let's go back and make them equal. Run it. And I just ran it and notice it didn't pause. Well, instead of running, right below the run when I right click is the debug. Hit the debug, and now it seems to have stopped. I've got down at the bottom a debugger window, and I'm sorry that the text is small, but it's just showing me right now the values of X and Y. If I click into the console tab, it tells me the debugger's running, but I'm not seeing anything. Nothing's been printed. It has stopped, but it's inside this if statement now, which is where we would expect it to be. Now, if I go back into the debugger tab up at the bottom, and then the last little icon, the arrow key looks like it's going at about a 45-degree angle down. If I click it, it will go to the next breakpoint it sees. Notice it jumped all the way down to that print. If I look in my console, you see it printed the X equal Y. Go back to the debugger, and now the program's ended, so all my variables have ended, and I see that in the console window side, it said after the if. So in this case, you can see, because this if was true, it went in and printed that one, but you could see it break. If I make X4, now This will be false, and this will be false. So it should do this last else if. Again, right click and go to the debug. And if I look in the console, now it has paused, not at this if or that print, but it has paused at this else if. So it executed the if statement. It was false, so it skipped the indented part and went down to this else if. Now that's going to be false, so when I tell it in the debugger window to click and run to the next one, it jumps down just before it executes this else if. Now this one should be true, so when I go to the next, it goes, you can see, inside the if statement. It's actually inside the if, getting ready to print. It's not printed it yet. Now when I tell it to go on, it would print that, and it's stopping at the after the if, so it's getting ready to end. I'll just tell it to go on and look in the console, and we see the x less than y. So if you want to step through your programs, using the debugger is a way to step through and see what's going on. And although now the program's ended, any of your variables will show in this window so you can see what the variable values are. And that works real well with loops and things when you're testing it. Get rid of any of the lines you don't want to debug anymore, or pause that when the debugger, just click on them again. So that's a real handy way to walk through and pause your program. So everybody is good with the if else ifs, right?
Yes, sir.
Okay. All right, now, and I think we've had a couple of other people show up. That's good. Let me copy this. And I will post these because these are good for all 4 sections. I'm probably going to post them on a Google Drive with and send everybody a link. That way, also some of the videos I've just been creating on YouTube that I've linked to, those last few, those will be on that same Google Drive section. That way I don't have to remember to post them for all 4 sections. I just have to post them once. Okay, so we've got that done. Next thing I want to look at then are complex operations. And with complex operations, what we can do is we can combine 2 or more tests. So we can combine, say, x equal y with maybe z equals a. And we can combine those in some manner so it's checking both in a single if rather than nesting them one inside the other. And I'm going to do it both ways, do one both ways, with and without nesting those values, so you can see how to do them both ways. One of the assignments tells you to do something without or with nested loops, so putting the ifs, or nested ifs rather, putting the ifs inside of the ifs. So let me say z equals 6, and let's make the other one w. Make it 6 to start with. Doesn't really matter. Without being able to do the complex or compound if statements, if I wanted to see if x was equal to y and see if z was equal to w, and I needed both of those to be true, I would need to do something like if x equal y, and then inside that if, another if. So if the first one is true, then I need to see if the next one's true. So if x, or not, or if z equals w, So print equal. In this case, I've not got any else's, so the only time it's going to get here is if both of those things are match. I'm going to go ahead and put a couple of breakpoints since we just did that. And I've still got my after the if there. So if I run this, it says after the if. Let me run it and debug, so it's going to pause. Okay, right now we know, based on what we saw, W is 6, X is 4, Y is 5, and Z is 6. It's going to check this if. Is this if going to be true or false? Well, we're X and Y. X is 4, Y is 5. That's false right now. Since it's false, will it get to this if? Well, no, because it will say that's false and it'll jump outside of this if. Okay, so now it's at the end of the program. And if I look at my console, it just printed the after the if. Let me change and make X 5 so that that will be true. Debug. So now it's still at this first if. It's not evaluated it yet. I tell it to step in. Now you see it, that first if was true, so now it's getting ready to check the second if. And that second if is also going to be true in this case, so it should jump down inside that if, and it does, and prints equal. And if I tell it to go on, it'll get to the end of the program. So that's how we can nest an if. And now we can have else's that go with any of these. If I do an else at this level, or you can even have else ifs. If I do an else at this level, when will it execute that else?
If Z is not equal to W.
If Z is not equal to W. Now, it won't even get there, though, if X and Y are not equal. So this else, because it's indented at the same level, it's indented at the same level as the Z equal W, that's when it executes. Go ahead, and I'm going to go ahead and put a breakpoint there. When I run it, it says equal. Well, we knew they were equal. And if I debug it and walk through, the first if was true, that outside if. The second if is going to be true, so it's going to skip the else part and go to the end of the program. Now, if I make that not equal, do the debug. Again, it gets that first if, it's going to check it, it's going to be true, so it's going to go in, looks at the second if, it's going to be false, so it should go down to the else, and it's down at the else. It's not printed it yet, it stopped just before that line, and then it will go on, and I can see the Z not W. If I add an else at this level, this will execute when X is not equal to Y. So right now, because X and Y are equal, it will never get to this else. Because once this if is true, it says don't even look at the else that goes with this if. But if I change that so that X is 7, so that's false, it's at the first if. Now it's going to be false. So when I tell it to go on, it skips down to that else that went with this if. Because it never goes into see any of those commands. And when I go on, I see it printed the X not equal Y. It will never even check the Z equal W in this case. So that one lets us nest or put ifs inside of ifs. And sometimes that's the best way to do it. It depends on what you're testing. And there is one lab out there that wants you to use this method where you nest the ifs inside of each other to solve the problem rather than use the complex conditions that we're getting ready to do.
I've looked at the labs, but I can't remember which lab it is that wants you to use this type of method.
Right. I think it's the max value.
Which sounds like 18, maybe. Wait, no, not 18. Maybe like 22 or something.
Yeah, I don't remember the numbers because I've got your labs, I've got my engineering programming labs, and those are numbered totally different. So if you want me to remember labs by lab number, it's never going to happen. And I've of course got my Active Directory labs. That's the Active Directory class is the one I'm having the most problems with because so many of their labs really need to be done on campus. So I'm having to refigure how we do those. They're going to be more theoretical than hands-on. Okay.
I have a quick question. Will you be posting these Zoom sessions anywhere?
Yes. For those of you that came in late, barring technical difficulty, it is supposed to be recording these, so I will probably post them because rather than try to post them 4 different times, I'm probably going to post them on my YouTube channel and then send you guys the links.
Okay. Yeah, because I have to pop out to go to another class here in a minute.
Right. I know that, and again, for those of you that came in after we started, what we're going to be doing is next week I'm probably going to do 2, maybe 3 of these sessions. I'll do one Monday night for the night students so that they can be live, and I'll do probably do at least 2 next week at different times. So for example, and I mentioned that at the beginning, I've got a couple of students that are in the CS2 class, and they had a mandatory meeting at this time. So next week, there'll probably be one, maybe Monday afternoon at noon or 1 o'clock. And then there'll probably be one on Tuesday at noon or 1 o'clock. Then, and one Monday night that probably starts at 7. And just to have different times so that rather than, since I've got 4 sessions, or sections rather, since I've got 4 sections, rather than have to do one for each section, I'm just inviting everybody to each of these Zoom meetings. And then we may repeat some of the stuff, we may not, just to let everybody have a chance to come at different times. All right. Okay, now, if what I really care about is just if both X and Y is equal and Z and W are equal, I don't care if X and Y are equal, if Z and W are not, there's another way or a better way of doing this, and that's using complex conditions, or sometimes called compound. I actually think I really like compound rather than complex, because compound or complex scares people, the word complex. Compound doesn't. And we've got 2 logical operators you can use depending on what you need to do. There is the and the or. With and, both sides of the and have to be true for the statement to be true. With the or, only one side. If we look at something called a truth table, and we say have X and Y. And I'm going to use 0 and 1. 0 generally is considered false. 1 is true. So with the and, if X is false, which would be, say, the left side, and Y is false, which we'll say is the right side, then the entire statement is false. If X is false and Y is false, then the statement's false. If X is, or I'm sorry, if X is false and Y is true, it's false. If X is true but Y is false, it's still false. The only time the statement is true is if both X and Y are true, or both the left and right side are true. I probably shouldn't have used X and Y since my variables are X and Y, but say maybe A and B here. So the way we would do an and here, so we'd say if X equal Y, and remember when I say the word equal, I'm saying the double equal, the word and then say W equal, the double equal again, Z. And so putting them that way, it's going to, in a single statement, test it. Instead of having two ifs, it will test it in the single if statement. So I'm just going to print all equal there and print not all equal. Now, when I say all equal, I'm meaning both sides. Let's say all conditions. True. And not all conditions true. So when it runs this one, it's going to check and see if X and Y are true, or equal rather. In this case, they're false. X is 7, Y is 5. So that makes the entire statement false. Even though the W and Z equals Z is true, well, no, it's false as well. So right now, both are false. So it's going to come down and do the not all true. And it did. Let me make X and Y equal and make W and Z equal. This time when it runs, X is going to equal Y, W is going to equal Z. So it's going to say, okay, print the true. Both of those conditions are true. So it says print conditions true. Down here it says not all true if one of those are false. So now what it did, it checked the X equal Y, that was true. So then it checked the W equals Z, that was true. As long as both sides of the and are true, it goes into the if that's true. But if I make either of them false, make X equal 1 now, says not all true. The X equal Y is false. The W equals Z is true, but both of those sides have to be true. So it says it was false, not all true. Make X equal Y true again. Make the Z equal W false. And again, it does the not all true because both sides of that one have to be true. Now, what you'll find is the lab I just mentioned that says don't use compound statements, use nested ifs, would actually be much easier to do using compound conditions. I think in a later lab, you'll actually redo it with the compound conditions. So that is the and. The and, both sides have to be true. With the or, only one has to be true. So with the or, if A is false, or the left-hand side's false, say, and B is false, then the statement is false. But if A is true and B is false, the whole statement is true. If A is false but B is true, the statement's true. And if both are true, the statement's true. So with the or, only as long as one side of the or is true, the entire or statement is true. So if I change this, actually before I change it, let me copy it. Now if I change this to an or, right now, X and Y is true, the WZ part, the left is true, the right is false. When I run it, it says print conditions true. This was true, so once it found a true, it doesn't even worry about the other side. If I make them both true, same thing's going to happen. It's going to be true. It doesn't matter which one of these. Well, actually, I didn't make them both true. I still had the X. I changed it. Let's get it right there. Now both should be true, and they are. If I now make the XY one false, it's still saying the true, because this is false, but when it checks then the or, it says that's true. And let me make them both false now. And now it does the not all true. What it did here is it checked the X and Y, that was false, then checked the W and Z, that was false, and it was able to, or said, well, the whole statement is false. We don't have to just check equal, we can check greater thans, less thans, all the things we could check before. So there is our compound conditions with the or. So one or the other. Now a little bit of inside baseball. The way Python checks is it checks, would in this case check the X equal Y first. If that is true, it actually never even checks with the or the other side. If it's false, then it goes and checks the other one. If this were back to the and, if the left-hand side was false, it would never check the right-hand side. One of the things we might do if we needed to optimize and make the program run fastest is looking if we had some insight as to which of those might be true most often, that would be the one we would probably put first. That would actually save a little time. Now, any programs we're doing are going to run so fast it won't matter. Any programs we're doing are going to run so fast it's not going to matter. But if you had a program that took an hour to do, if you could shave off a few minutes because it was processing millions of items of data because it took an hour to run, that could be worth trying to figure out. You can use these complex conditions in the elifs as well. So if you had if something, elif something, elif something, you could do that as well. Any questions there? Now, can you add multiple ones? Can you have multiple, say, ors or multiple ands? Well, the answer is yes. I can do another or. Actually, before I do that, let me copy this. I could add another or, and I could say maybe x equal Z. And if I have all three here, since this is an OR, any one of those three would have to be true. Doesn't matter. They don't all have to be true, only one of them. So when I run it now, it says print conditions true. Well, the X equal Y was false, 5 and 4. The W equals Z was false, 5 and 4. But the X equals Z were both 5. So this one did the true. So if any one of those, in this case, is true, the OR says everything is true. Let me make Z, say 1. So this should now be false, not all true. So X equal Y was false, W equals Z was false, and X equals Z were false. So all three were false. There we end up with a statement that's false. But if any one of them are true, the whole statement's true. If we do the ands, now all three would have to be true. So when I run it right now, it's not true. The X equal Y is false. So it won't even actually check the others. So the whole statement is false. Let me make that one true. Run it. It's still not true. The X equal Y is true, but the W equals Z is false. So it won't even bother checking, even though the X equals Z is false. Now, if I run it with making the W and Z equal, still it's not true. This is true. This is true, but since this one is false, the statement's false. The only way I get a true on it is if all of that is true, and then I get the print true conditions are true. So that's the ands. Now, the last thing on that is, can I mix ands and ors? Well, the answer is yes, but you have to be very careful. If I mix ands and ors, I have to know how it does things. It will look and work left to right. So right now it'll do these first two. It'll say X equal Y and W equals Z. And it evaluates that. That would be true or false in this case. X is not equal to Y, even though W is equal to 0. So the whole statement will be false. Print conditions true. I got ahead of myself. Sorry. It's still true because the X equals Z is true. So it ands these together. This is false. But then the OR, the false, is ANDed with the OR. I thought I'd made those false as well. The OR is ANDed with the false here. It ANDs these two together first and then ORs it. And that makes the whole statement true. Now, if we did the other way around, then it would AND, if I had an OR here and an AND here, it would OR these together and then AND. So it goes left to right. If you're not sure which way it's going to do them, or if you want to force it to do it in a particular order, you can use parentheses. So if I did parentheses, remember anything in parentheses is done first, it would force it to do the AND first. Well, it would do that normally. But if I wanted it to do the OR first, if I put my parentheses over here, that would do the OR first. So it would OR the second half and then AND it. And now it's not true, because although this or is true, when you AND it with this false, it's false. Be very careful when you're mixing ands and ors, and I strongly recommend if you're mixing ands and ors, you use the parentheses to force it into the order that you want it to operate in. I'm not sure, I think the night class we had not covered this. I'm not sure where we had been on the others. If you're doing strings, capitalization is important. If you compare capital Bill with lowercase bill, that would be false. So if you're going to compare strings, use the lower method in order to convert everything to lowercase before you test it, or you can do the upper method if you prefer. So make sure if capitalization matters when you're testing, or doesn't matter rather when you're testing, you do the upper and lower. Questions with compound ifs this way? I thought of something while I was doing that last example, but it has escaped my mind. There was something I was going to throw in there, but that's escaped my mind at the moment. So we've got the ands and ors, we've got the complex conditions, and again, that one that it tells you to use nested ifs. If instead of nested ifs, if I did not tell you use the nested ifs and not use those complex conditions, using complex conditions makes it much easier. So here are if else, and elifs. Does anybody have any questions on those? All right, I guess we got them. And most of these, I've linked to some YouTube videos. I've done most of these, if not all of these, different examples, but the same thing. And once, again, barring technical difficulties, we post the Zoom, you can go back over and look at these. Okay, so there are our if statements, if elifs, complex ifs. Any questions before I go on?
No.
Okay, the next topic, and we're going to actually end up going back and looking at for loops with it a little bit, but the next topic is lists. And lists are another data type. If you've ever done anything with arrays, either in another programming language, or if you've done some of the statistical stuff in Excel, where you have a lot of data, and you maybe have, for example, in an Excel spreadsheet, a column of data, that column would be considered an array or a one-dimensional array. And Python has arrays, but they call them lists. And a Python list is what we call mutable. Mutable means it's changeable. We're also going to use tuples a little later on, and tuples are similar to lists except they're immutable. Once you create a tuple, you cannot add to it, change it, anything like that. The easiest way to define a list is you give it a name, variable name, and in square brackets, you separate the values by commas. And that would create a list. And if I just printed it, it prints it, and it prints it in the square brackets. So I have created a list. I can have a list of strings. I put those in quotes, separated again by commas. And so that prints in the square brackets the XYZ. Now, one thing you can do with Python with lists, and I don't recommend it, but Python is one of the few languages that will let you do this, is you can have a list with elements of that list being different data types. I could have a number, or say an integer there. I could have a string. I could have a floating point. So I can have all those different data types and mix them. I don't recommend that because usually you're going to be processing those lists. You're going to be doing things with the data in those lists. And if they're different data types and we're, say, doing math operations, we get to that V, that string, and the math operation is going to give me a problem. So I strongly recommend when you're creating lists, always be the same data type. And I think all of the labs that we end up doing with lists are going to be that way. Now, remember how we sliced strings? Well, we can slice lists. And I'm just going to print right now. So if I've got the list 1, and if I just want a particular element, just like with strings, that first element in the list is index position 0. So the 3 is in index 0, the 5 is in index 1, the 7 index 2. So if I put the square brackets just like we did with strings, and I say 1, that should be the 5. That should print the 5. And it does. If I said, let's say 1:4, that should print the 5, 7, and 9. Well, 5 is in index position 2 or 1, 7 in 2, 9 in 3. It goes up to position 4, but does not include position 4. Just like with a string, the index positions work the same. If I did :2, it would go up, start at the beginning and go up to 2, but not include the 2. So it did the 3 and the 5, the index position 0 and 1. And if I did, say, 2: it would start at index position 2 and go to the end of the string of the list. 7, 9, and 11. So position 2, 3, and 4. If I told it to print -1, that would be 11, the last element. And if I did -2, that would give me the next to the last element. And lastly, let's do -2 colon, starting at the next to the last element to the end of it, so I can use those ranges there. So that's just a start with lists. You create them. One way is the square bracket. If I wanted to create an empty list, if I just put the empty brackets there, that would create an empty list. Notice it's grayed out right now because I've not used it at all. So that is the first introduction to lists. As I said, lists are mutable or changeable. So I'm going to go ahead and just go back to the list one because that's the numbers. That's the easiest one. So I've printed list one. I can change a value in it. If I say list one of element 2, 0, 1, 2, that's the 7. Make it equal to 13. Then let me print list 1. If I run it now, notice that the 7, the second time I print it, is changed to 13. So I can change a value in the list. That could be results of a math operation. Say list 1 of element 2 equals, say, list 1. It doesn't have to be something that's in the list of element 0 plus 22. And when I run it, okay, yeah, there we go. List position 2 is now 25. So I can change it that way. I can also add things to the end of the list. If I do list 1 dot append, that will add something to the end of it. So if I do that, now when I run it, I've added an element to the end of it that allowed me to append to the list or add to the end. I can also insert and things. We'll do that next week. This is, I think, a good stopping point. We've been at it about an hour, and I wanted to try to keep these to about an hour because that's about as long as we're good at sitting. Okay, let me open it up to questions, and if there are any questions, I will field those for basically as long as we need to.
I noticed it had brackets around multiple values in a list when you printed them.
Yeah. When you just print the entire list, it prints them in brackets. If I printed just an element of the list, say element 0, then it won't be in brackets. But if I tell it to do the whole list, it prints it in brackets.
Okay.
And what we'll do as we continue with the lists next week, what we'll do is we'll see how in a loop you can go through the loop and iterate, that hard for me to say, iterate through the list and go through one element at a time and manipulate one element at a time, where we can only output. So when I printed it this way, I said print the entire list, so it will print it in brackets. But if I print an individual element, it will print it the way we would expect other variables. Good question.
I have a question.
Go
Oh.
ahead.
Sorry. Mine's about something different. So if you had another one about this, go ahead.
I was going to ask on the append method.
Mm-hmm.
Are you only allowed to add one value or multiple values?
Well, let's look and see. Now, here would be the trick. If I put multiple values separated by commas this way, I will get an error. But what if I put them in square brackets? Well, let me print it afterwards. And now, well, I need a 1 here. Now notice how it did it. It appended it as a list element. So appending multiple values in a single append statement is really tricky, and it really gives you the results you don't want. If we needed to do multiple values, we would do multiple append statements. And when we get into doing loops next week, we'll be able to go through the loop and append those multiple values one at a time. All right, Caleb, I think had a question.
It was me, Daniel.
Oh.
The labs we just did, the one where we're seeing if a number is divisible by 9.
Okay.
I got the output to work, correctly, but can you talk through what's exactly going on kind of behind the scenes? Because it seems to me like it's working backwards of what I would think it would work, if that makes sense.
In that one, you're using the modulus. So if I had, say, z equals, let's say 3 mod rather than divide by 12, and then print z. I said 12, but I typed 13. Okay. When I run, it says z is 3. Well, if you take 3 and divide it by 13, it goes 0 times is the integer part. But if you do the modulus, what you're getting is the remainder. And so the remainder is 3 in this case. So 3 divided by 13 is 0 with a remainder of 3. Now, if I make that, say, a 15, it will, z divided by 13, or 15 divided by 13 will go 1 time, but it has a remainder of 2. And so we get a remainder of 2. If we say 13, or let's actually make it 26. If we make it 26 mod 13, that will go 2 times with a remainder of 0. So there's the remainder of 0. So in your if statement, if you have, and you can do it two ways. You can do the calculation of the remainder and then compare it, or you can do the calculation in the if statement. But if you compare that remainder to 0, you know it went an even number of times. If the remainder was a non-zero value, it doesn't divide equally. So in here, the remainder is 0, so 26 divides by 13 equally. But 27 will have a remainder of 1. Okay, come on, run. Did I not? I think with the Zoom running in the background, sometimes, yeah, there it goes. Sometimes this pauses a little. Has a remainder of 1. So if you compared your modulus division to 0, you'd know if it went equal number of times. And if that remainder is anything but 0, then it did not divide evenly. Okay. Does that answer?
Yeah, I kind of see more what's actually happening, kind of within the program, because like I say, I got it to do. I did mine inside the statement.
Yeah, you can.
But and it works. When depending on what number you put in, it'll print the correct thing. I just wasn't understanding what the percent sign, how that kind of played into it. I was.
Yeah, the percent is the modulus or remainder division. So you did it something like this. If 27 mod 13 equals 0. Of course, you had a variable in there, but
I actually just put I put num equals int input and then print out, input an integer. And then I put if num %9
right,
colon and then print
okay.
Num is not divisible by 9, and then I put else print num is divisible by 9.
You used a shortcut, and if you actually do that shortcut, 0, anytime with an if statement, 0 is considered false. Anything but 0 is considered true on it. So if I said if 0, now this is going to be false. Or actually, if I say if 0, so if it's false, let's say print my editing. If I run this now, I said if 0 and run it, code is unreachable. Because when I run it here, notice that it's giving me, it's got this yellow. There's no way it'll ever, in this particular case, when I said if 0, get to 0. And if I change this to a 1, which is true, that highlighting goes away. And when I try and run it, eventually it should, print the 0. It's still printing the 1 from above. Because this is, by definition, if I just put a 0 in here, false. So when you did when you did something like, in my case, I've got the 27 mod 13. Right now, that will be false because the result is a 1. Or I'm sorry, that'll be true because the result is a 1. And if I make it 26 and run it, now it's false because the result is 0. So you just did a shortcut. That would be the same as saying equal 0. But that's just a shortcut that you can use. That will not work in every programming language. Some languages require you to do it this way. Python has a lot of shortcuts like that, and in a beginning class, I don't like to show a lot of those shortcuts, because now if you're a programming major and you go on to CS1 and in Java try to use those same shortcuts, they're not going to work. If we had a second semester of Java, or not of Java, of Python, we would include a lot of those shortcuts. There actually is talk about, as part of the Internet of Things, doing a class in data analysis or big data, and that would be a second semester Python class. Whether that will ever happen or not, I don't know.
So yeah, I had just looked upon it, and I really didn't know it was working, but I didn't know why. I was literally writing a little bit of it, and then I would run it to see what kind of output I get, and then I'd add a little more. And
Right. And that's
when
a
I
good
got
way to
done,
do things.
it was so simple. I thought, this can't be right.
No,
You know,
that is a perfectly legitimate, because if it returns a 0, the if statement is false. If it returns anything other than 0, it evaluates the if statement as true.
all right. Thank you.
All right. Okay, others. All right, if there's nothing else, then we'll go ahead and end the session. I've got the discussion boards. That's probably, if you've got a specific question on something, use the discussion board. If it's a specific question on something you don't think should go on the discussion board, email me. If it's something that you think others would have questions to, and that just last question, that would have been a perfect question to go on the discussion board. That way others in the class can see it. Regretfully, there's not an easy way of combining all 4 classes' discussion boards. Okay. All right. Any last questions?
Where are you going to post the other Zoom meetings? You mentioned
Well,
other days and times that you were going to be offering it.
They will. All of them will probably end up being posted on my YouTube channel, and I will give everybody. I will send links out to when they get posted. That way, I only have to post them once. If I post them, I can actually upload them to YouTube, but then I have to post them for every class, and you know how I'm forgetful about getting them those UJs posted to a particular class sometimes when I get in a hurry, especially the classes when I've got one right after another.
No, I mean, like if we want to zoom in one of the other Zoom sessions you're going to do, where are you posting all the Zoom sessions and the announcements for all the classes? So
no, what I'm going to do is I will post all of the Zoom sessions for everything, all of them, on probably my YouTube channel, and then I'll just send out an email with a link, because I have figured out how I can send out a single email to everybody in all 4 classes.
Right.
So
Okay.
yes, you will get a link to the other Zoom sessions.
Okay. Because yeah, I'm probably going to need to do that. I had my mic muted, but I had kids in the background, and it's just crazy at my house right now. So.
I understand. My kids, my oldest Dan, he headed out for his deployment with the National Guard, and so he's actually in Lenore right now, and tomorrow he'll be flying to Texas for a couple of weeks before he goes to Cuba for a year. My youngest is either working or I think he's with a friend right now, but my youngest, who's 18 now, you call youngest, by the way, just to brag a little, last night he passed his Eagle Board of Review, so he is an Eagle Scout. So both of my boys made Eagle Scout, if any of you are former Scouts.
Congratulations.
Yeah, congrats.
Thank you. And those of you that have been may have been scouts know that only a very small percentage of kids make Eagle, and both of my boys did it. So I can brag a little bit once in a while.
That's
Well, I
Okay, we'll go ahead and end it now. If there's any questions and all, let me know. If anybody needs one-on-one, and we can set a one-on-one Zoom for people if you need some things that way. But you need to email me, and we'll figure a time when I'm available, because I am going to be working on other things as well as having Zoom sessions for my engineering programming students and for my Active Directory students.
I have a couple questions. We're not going to do attendance quizzes, correct? Our assignments are going to show that we're tracking
Correct.
with what's going on, right?
Correct. As long as I've got assignments that are due, and what I'm probably going to do with the labs is I'm going to string them out. Instead of having 2 or whatever done the same day, they're going to be probably 4 assignments. There might be a couple, the beginning list ones will be short. They're going to be probably 4 assignments a week, which is what we would normally done, but they're going to be due. I'll have one due on a Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, that way. And as long as you turn in your executive summary or your an assignment that week, that will count as attendance for the entire week, actually. So only essentially 1 attendance per week.
Okay. And the other thing, I sent you a chat, but I don't know if you had time or noticed it. Several of us were in Mr. Sabri's Zoom session when this one started, and he went ahead and let us leave early to come to yours.
Yeah.
But normally that class ends at 10:20,
Mm-hmm.
and he's having us zoom in as if we were in class every week. So if I know you're juggling a million schedules probably, if in the future this one started at 10:20 or 10:30, that would be good for those of us in that class.
I could do that. And so what I'll do then is I'll look at starting classes I'll start classes at 10:30 on, if I'm doing a Monday or a Wednesday, or start it at 12, because 12 is the other Monday, Wednesday Python class. Probably the one Monday, we'll do one Monday, it will probably start at 12. And then my Tuesday, Thursday, I'll start at 12 start at 1:30, because that's when my Tuesday, Thursday class normally meets. My Monday night one, I will probably start at 7. 6, some of the students that work have trouble getting to school at 6, so that'll give them a chance to come home and there. So I'll probably in the future do 10:30, either 10:30 or 12 on Monday and Wednesday, and do 1:30 on Tuesdays and Thursdays, and do probably 7 o'clock on the Monday nights. There's a good chance the Monday night one will repeat a lot of what we do in the days, because very few, if any, of the night students can make a day session.
That sounds good. Okay. Thank you.
All right. Well, okay, we will see you guys hopefully, I say see you, we'll have you one day next week. Talk to you later. Bye.